Hello, welcome to the workshop. So today we have a new custom build PC. These are all the parts we've got for it, including a brand new case, a Fractal Focus G. So it's all going to go in there. We've got a 1050 Ti graphics card. We have 32 gigabytes of RAM, Kingston Fury. We've got a Samsung Evo 970, M.2 SSD. We've got a Ryzen 7 5700G. We're also going to be putting in a Blu-ray writer. We have got the ROG STRIX B55 0 gaming motherboard. And we're powering it all with a RM750 modular power supply. So let's get building. Right, so first of all we're going to be starting off with our motherboard. Look what we've got. So that's our Wi-Fi antenna. Also your mounting bracket for it. We have some cables, the manual, and the install disc, and just some warranty information. Nice little thank you card. One of the most important things of any computer, lots of stickers. Also got cable ties. We've got a USB-C to what looks like headphone jack. Cable ties, and at the minute what looks to be a keyring. Also got a couple of studs, that'll be for the M.2 drive, and a couple of rubber feet it looks like, single side so for the M.2 pads. Right. Wherever I'm building, I use the box as a stand. So out. And that's what the board looks like. Got plenty of I/O on the back. Got 6 Type A ports, 2 Type C ports. That's an audio Type C port. And I've also got 6 SATA connectors. Got the standard ATX power supply, 4 RAM slots, We've got the graphics slots, PCI Express slots. Right, so if I put it around this way, so we've got our Ryzen 5700G processor. There's the obligatory Ryzen 7 sticker. Also comes with the cooler. And I will be using the stock cooler for the moment. It's pre-applied with some thermal paste. So I'll put that back in the box for safety. So let's install our chip. Now with the AMD processors, they do have the pins on the bottom, so it's very, very important not to bend them and to make sure you get the orientation right, which is denoted by this little triangle. And you'll find a matching triangle on the board, just here. And all we need to do is lift this armour up, which will open up the socket. We get our CPU, and we just gently line it up and drop it into the slot. No force required, it will just drop into the slot, and then we just push the arm back down, and that's the CPU installed. So just need to remove these clamps. Our stock AMD cooler has the screws already pre-applied and it doesn't need the clamps. It's always good to note the orientation of the CPU fan cable and try and work out where the fan cable goes. In this case it comes up here, so ideally we want the fan cable to have the shortest path possible and to make it look as neat as possible, so I'm going to be placing it in this orientation. It's just a case of lining it up with the mounting brackets that are already installed. Just use a screwdriver to screw it down. You need to put a little bit of pressure on to compress the spring. It's always good to support it from underneath the board. And try not to tighten one corner at a time. You want to try and go around the CPU a little bit at a time. An ideal try and do it opposite corners. And that's the CPU in. So that's the CPU installed and the CPU cooler mounted. Now we just need to put our fan connector in, which is in this case this one just here. They are always marked on the boards. So you can see just here it's a CPU fan. It's also got an I/O pump, and CPU optional. So basically all those can be used as fan headers, but ideally you want this one for the CPU fan. And that's just a case of plugging it in. Just like that. For cable management, we can just tuck that down and around so that it looks neat and tidy when it's installed. We can always do a final cable management when it's all in the machine. If you're ever in doubt of where to plug any of the cables, it's always useful to look at the manual that came with the motherboard. It will always list out every connection, and further on it will usually do a fully detailed way of all the connections on the boards. So you really can't go wrong with most motherboard power installs. So that's the power connector, and how to plug SATA cables in, etc. So chuck that to one side. Right, so the next thing I'm going to install is the M.2. We have a Samsung 970 Evo Plus for this. Leave it sit in there for a minute. What we need to do is just remove this little cover plate. And you can see the slot there and the appropriate pegs for them. So, because this is a 80mm one, what we want to do is grab our little M.2 posts, and before we slide that in, we're just going to attach it in here, screw that one in. That's just screwed in just there. And then we're going to be putting the M.2 in. Just put it in at an angle, push it in, and then we push it down onto that little stud that we've just put in, and then we secure it with one of these little screws. And you want to make sure it's tight so it's not loose, but you don't want to over tighten it, breaking the SSD. So now we've got that in, we're going to just put our cover plate back over the top of it. And that's our M.2 installed. Next up, we're going to go with our 32GB of RAM. have a Kingston Fury RAM for this. I think it's 3200 megahertz. Yeah, 3200 megahertz. And we're going to be looking for where we want to put them. Here we go. So I was just looking for the marks on the board. So they're marked with a star. I would just double check the manual, but normally that's the ones that you use first. And they're in the normal place, so I've actually opened those up before I noticed what the board said. With this one, you've only got the one clip. This is a DDR4 RAM, so we just want to push it in, slide it down until we get that to click. Same with the other one. Just want to slide it straight down. Useful to support the board from underneath, and just ensure that they're both in. It's always good to tidy as you go, so I've just tidied up all the bits we've done so far. Next thing we're going to be doing is going to be unboxing the graphics card. So it's not a super powerful graphics card, it's a 1050 Ti, so quite small in comparison to quite a few other cards that you get, but this would be fine for what the client required. So we're going to make sure that the clip is open, and we're just going to line up the holes, and we're just going to push that in place until we hear the click or the clip engaging. So just that clip here, that will just engage as you get it, as you push it in. Obviously, it's always good to do a bench test first. This is how I normally build them. So I check it on the bench, it makes it nice and easy, and then you don't have to faff about putting it in the case straight away, or undoing it if you find that it doesn't work. Next thing we need to do for our trial bench test is we're going to pull over our power supply. So we've got an RM750X here. Some manuals, comes with a UK power plug, various cable ties, have a nice little bag, and that'll have all the modular cables in. And we obviously have the power supply itself. So this is the power supply. You can see it's a fully modular design. Little warning sticker on the back. So basically this fan won't run if it's not using very much power. It's the exact same system I have in mine actually, which is why I'm happy for the client to use it as well. So just take off that sticker. first cable I'm looking for is the 24-pin motherboard connector. And you'll see that Corsair do a very good job. They label all the ends of theirs, and that'll basically match up with these plugs here. So the 24-pin ATX. So we have one. Just push it in there until it clicks, and then the other side again until it clicks. So they're both in there. And then we also need the 8-pin CPU. And you'll see that this one also says the 4+4 CPU. Just undo the cable tie. And again, it's labelled. So we're just going to put this one in there. It doesn't matter which one you use. So that's for the CPU and PCI, the 6+2 for the GPU. So I'm just going to put the CPU in there for a minute. We're also going to grab our PCI 6+2. Again, I'm going to take a cable tie off that one. And again, they're nicely labelled at the end. So it's 6+2. And that's going to just plug in next to the CPU. Just push that one in like that. And because we've got the M.2, we don't really need anything else to be powered at the moment. So we're going to put our 24-pin plug in. Push it until it clicks. I'm so used to doing bigger graphics cards, I just put this one in by instinctively. This doesn't require a separate power supply. So I'll remove that one. So the other one we need to do is the 4+4. And that one plugs in up there. So we've got our CPU one plugged in, we've got our 24 plug plugged in. I'm just going to plug that one in there for a minute. Plug it in there. It spins around. Just going to grab HDMI cable so I can see the anything on screen. Right, so I'm going to switch the power on for that. Just going to turn that on its side so if the fan spins then it's got airflow. Just make sure that the cables are currently clear from the fan there. We're going to turn the switch on the back of the power supply. And then I don't have a push button. So the easiest way to start any a motherboard in this state is to just short the power pins They are normally marked on here, and if I could find the manual, they would also be marked in the manual as well. Right, so almost always marked F panel, and you can see you got the power LED plus and minus, you got power, power button, power and ground, and you've also got the hard drive activity light LED plus and minus, and you've got the reset button, assuming if your case ever had a reset button. So the ones we're going to be shorting together just to simulate a power button push is the power and ground. So it's the 2 pins at the top right hand side of this header here, which equates to this header here, and it's basically just a case of shorting those 2 pins together, and we have power. So looking at got a little LED indicator up here. So at the minute, can't really tell what it says. So at the minute that's saying DRAM. So at the minute that's erroring on the RAM. On first boot of this, I was getting a DRAM error, and the reason for that is because I'm using quite a new, a much newer CPU than the board knew of. It needed the BIOS update. So now, if I short these 2 pins together, right pins. It's now going through its check process. And we now have a BIOS screen. So now we're at that point. We could install Windows on it at this point, but I'm happy that all this hardware now works. So the next step is going to be preparing the case for this to go in. So this is our case. It's a Fractal Focus G. I can put links in the description below. We've got this nice window. It's in a very lovely gunmetal grey with black accents. It's got this mesh design on the front. There are 2 fans hidden behind here, and we've got 2 expansion bays at the top, which the client has asked for a Blu-ray writer and a card reader. So we're going to be putting a card reader in as well as a Blu-ray writer. So the first thing we want to do is we want to undo these. I just want to undo these little thumb screws. So, little thumb screws there. They are captive thumb screws, so they stay in the case. And just pull the case backwards and slide it off. Right. Because this is a new install, I'm going to be obviously mounting a new motherboard. I'm going to remove the back cover as well. It also gives us the area for doing some cable management. So, same principle, just undo the 2 thumb screws and pull the back off. When you get a new case, they always give you a little box of bits and pieces. So we've got in here some other thumb screws. We have some motherboard mounts, I think. Yep, got some motherboard mounts in there, as well as a few other types of nuts. We have some motherboard screws, and we have some cable ties. I'll just put it over there for now. So one of the first things I like to do is get the power supply in, because it's the biggest thing to put in, and it's easier to put it in now while it's empty. And keeping our plugs that we plugged in earlier plugged in. I don't believe we should need any others for this one. Now this does have a nice little mesh at the bottom, so this fan will be positioned down. All we do is slide that in. It looks like this hard drive cage is movable, so you could move it towards the front. If it gets in the way, I probably will do that. And to do that, we've just got a couple of screws on the bottom that will hold it in place. We're not using that hard drive caddy, so I might actually just take it out altogether. Obviously I'll include it with the client so that they can decide at a later date if they want to use it or not. For now, I'm just going to remove it altogether. Looks like there's one more screw holding it around the back. Just here. And then that hard drive caddy can just come out. And just so we know what these screws are for, they're just standard screws, but I like to keep them with the component I remove. Right, so I'm going to put our power supply unit in there. So our power supply unit also came with some screws and also plenty of cable ties. Forward. So there's 4 holes in the power supply unit, and it's just a case of making sure that they align with the case holes. And screw them in. There's a little bit of movement and wiggle room with the power supply, so I tend to put them in 2 corners first, and then the other 2 normally just line up. Again, you don't want to over tighten any screws when doing this. Just hand tight, that's enough. So that's our power supply mounted. Cables for this will probably just go out through this hole at the moment. Do a final cable manage when everything's all back together, but it's always good to try and get them started where you want them to go. So in this case, both the main power supplies can go out there, and then we'll hide them up behind here. We now want to untie these cables. These ones for the front I/O. So we've got USB 3. We should have, that's for the front power header. We have a USB and we have an audio. Again, what I do is I just chuck them out the way for a minute. So at the moment we don't have any mountings for the motherboard. So I'm just going to grab our motherboard, and this one's got a built-in I/O shield. Not all motherboards do. Some you will have to push into the little slot at the back here, but in this case we have a built-in I/O shield. We've got one pin as a locator. Right, next thing we're going to be doing is mounting our motherboard, or preparing the case to mount our motherboards. You can just about see down here, and it's black on black, it's difficult to see. We've got ATX, which is marked with an A, and we've got an M ATX, which is marked with an M, so that's mini ATX and standard ATX. And we've got various holes we've marked with different letters. So we've got some marked A and M, we've some got marked just M, and some marked with just an A. The board we have is a full-size ATX, so we're interested in the holes marked with A. So what we're going to do, I get our bag of bits, and just put them in there for now. And we're just pulling out these little devices, and they just screw into the motherboard, into the tray, and then the motherboard can mount into these. So again, just following the holes that are marked A. Right, so all these mounting points are in now. You want to make sure that they're all screwed all the way in, because you don't want one to be uneven and make the motherboard uneven. I'm just going to grab some screws for the motherboard, and what I like to do is just double check that each one will screw in. So I'm just putting them in, just a couple of turns just to make sure that they screw in. I've had these in the past where the threads have been damaged or not very well thread, and you don't find it until you put your motherboard in, and then you need to take the motherboard out to remove and change one of these. So I always like to do it now as a preventive measure. And they're all good. So now we're going to be mounting the motherboard. This is nice and secure mounted. It's a nice easy place to hold it, where the CPU fan is. I've obviously left the RAM in there and the CPU and everything in there because I don't need to take any of that out while mounting it in. Obviously taking the graphics card out, so put that in afterwards. The M.2 is still in there, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be aligning the back I/O shield. In fact, actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the sticker off because it'll probably be difficult afterwards. So just aligning the back I/O shield with the hole and then manoeuvring it into place and looking for the locating peg that we had in here. So that's now in. I'm just going to hold that in place a moment. And we're just going to secure one of the screws at the top. And that's held in place to do the rest of them. Now, obviously, it's very important not to over tighten these because you will damage the motherboard. So we've got 3 screws right at the top. We have 2 midway. Depending on your case, you may have a third if you don't have one of these little locating pins. And then we've got 3 at the bottom. I haven't done these too tight, so I'm just going back and just ensuring that they are tight enough and none are loose. So that's all good. Motherboard's nice and secure in there. Right. Next we're going to be installing our graphics card. Obviously we're going to be putting it just here, so just need to line up which blanking plates we need to remove, and in this case it's going to be these 2. One. And 2. Same principles before, just line up the slot, make sure the little catch is still open, and we're just going to be pushing it in until it locks into place with that clip, and you can always ensure that clip has shut fully. And then we're just going to get our thumb screws that we just removed for the blanking plates. And we're just going to screw those back in. Now I'll just hold the graphics card in place. And you can always tighten them with a screwdriver as well. And that's our graphics card mounted. So that's now 90% of the way there. Also we need to do all the front mount connections, etc. But I'll do that in just a moment. I think the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be putting in the Blu-ray writer and the card reader. Just need to pop out the front part. I've just got two little clips. Just push them together, pop out. Right, first thing we're going to pop in is our Asus Blu-ray writer. It's a 16 speed Blu-ray writer. I'm going to put this one in the top. It's just a case of slide it in. I want it so that it's flush to the front. We're just going to take the supplied mounting screws and we're just going to screw them into the side. If they line up, I tend to use the ones that are single holes as opposed to these sliding holes, but these are also useful if you need to adjust where it sits in the front of the case. But those two mounting holes are absolutely perfect for how flush that is. Next up we've got our card reader and USB slots. I'm just going to undo those cables first. And we're going to feed them in. There's a nice big hole underneath the drive bay, just here. So I'm going to utilise that hole as opposed to sending them out the back. It should be easier to then hide the cables by putting them through this gap here. Same principle, just slide it in until it's flush. And we're going to be using the supplied screws to mount it. They have given us 4 screws for this, so I'm just going to put an extra one in down the bottom just to ensure that it really is not going to move. And that's the 2 bays in like that. So next thing I'm going to be doing is looking at the cables we've got. So we've got the USB 3 from the front mounted header. We also have a USB 3 on top here. Unfortunately, the motherboard only has a single USB 3 socket, so I'm only going to be using the ones from the card reader as opposed to the single one that's on top, because it will give more USB 3s if I use the card reader one. I'm just going to start making some connections. So that's the USB 3. We have a USB 2 header. Again, that's from the card reader. we've got two USB headers down the bottom here. What I'm going to do with this one, I think I'm going to run it out the back and I'll run it in here. That way I can hide the cable along here and cable manage that to the back. The USB headers are keyed, they've got a certain pattern, so they only go in one way around. We've got a SATA cable here. This comes from the front header as well. It's an eSATA port. For this one, I'm going to plug it into one of the latter ports. That way, when I put the drive in, I'm going to put that as port 1. I could put this as port 2, but it's probably unlikely to ever be used. But if you have the first ports left free, it means if another hard drive gets put in the base of this, then we can always use the first ports for the hard drives. And again, I'm going to wrap that one down around there, so they all get cable managed together. We also have HD audio. That's coming from the case. Just looking for the audio connector. It's over here on the left. And I don't think the case has left enough wire on this to reach that. Messy. Just enough cable to be able to mount it onto this header. So we've got the cable running at the back, and it's just plugged into this header here. So next thing we're going to do is just put in the front headers from the motherboard, from the case. So I put the I've got the USB one here. So we're going to put the USB one in again. It only goes one way around. I'm just going to plug that one into the second USB header on the motherboard, and then we've got the front I/O, so reset switch, power switch, hard drive activity LEDs, and power LED. They're going to go onto this header here. It's very small on there, and when you've got a motherboard in, it's almost impossible to read. So it's always good to just double check with your manual, and it gives you a nice clear diagram. So we've got the power LED plus and minus, the power button. This far one's not used. We've got the reset switch on these two, and we've got the hard drive LEDs here. So I've run them through behind the case and through here. So we're going to start with the power switch. And next to that is the power LED. You quite often find the power LED is in two pieces to try and get the positive and negative the correct way around. They're not always next to each other on some cases. In this case they are. We've got the hard drive, again marked polarity plus and minus, and make sure you get your polarities the right way around, otherwise the LEDs won't work. And finally we've got the reset switch. And obviously not all cases will have all them. Some cases don't have a reset switch, a hard drive light or a power light. So you might end up just having a power switch in some cases, just to plug into there. That's absolutely fine. So that's now our front I/O done, so power switch, etc. We've got our connections from our card reader all connected up, USB 3, the eSATA and the front USB. We've still got the fans to connect, and I'll probably use these two headers down here to try and hide as much of the wire as possible. So we'll do that one now. And just untwist the cables. And the easiest way to probably put them up is through this large hole down here. And the first one will run along here. And just push them in. You'll notice that the headers have 4 pins, and in this case the fan only has 3 pins. That just means it's not a PWM fan, so it doesn't report its speed, etc. back. But it's still got a little keyway, and you just got to line that up on the 3 pins above the keyway. I'm just going to feed that one up the same way. And just push it on. And take the rest of the cable down there. If I had mounted these fans, I would have probably mounted them so that the cables came up out here, and you could hide them a lot better. But I'll probably try and see if they'll go and run down here. Right. Now the other things we need to connect up, we've got our power cable. Depending on how thick the power cable is, it will depend on how you want to run it and how flexible it is. This one's not very flexible. You can get extensions that are more flexible. But for now I'm going to run it through the big gap here. And just push it home. And make sure it's all the way pushed in. And then that will be cable tied around here, so it'll look a lot neater. Not forgetting our 8-pin CPU connector, which I can run up here. both the CPU pin and the motherboard connector, they are keyed uniquely, so you can only put them in one way round, so they can't go in the wrong way round. Right, so that's everything in. We're probably at a point where we can do a test fire. So plug our power supply back in. Plug our HDMI cable back in. And then we're ready to go. So turn the switch on. We've got our board lighting up, which is good. Let's see what happens when we hit the power button. We have life. Okay, after our initial test, happy with it all powered up. Just need to wire in the Blu-ray drive. So we've got just another SATA cable. Plug it into the back of the drive. I'm going to feed it out the back, and then we're going to feed it in here. I'm going to put it in port 1, which I believe is the lower port on here. We also need to supply that power, so we get another one of our modular power supplies, the one with the SATA connectors. I'm just going to plug it into one of the banks here that are labelled peripheral and SATA. Try and get it be as low and close as possible to the back. And following the same route as we have done before, I'm going to feed it out the bottom of here. It will then follow up behind. I can bring it in the top up here, and then we can just pop it in the back next to our SATA connector on the back of that drive. Right, so the cable's all now nicely managed down the centre here. We've got the 4-pin that comes across here, and we've got the audio one that comes across here. Not too worried about those, they'll be easy enough to compress. There's not a great deal of space on this particular case for cable management. There's a little bit of an indent here for the thicker cables for the 24-pin and the 4-pin CPU or 8-pin CPU. But the case will do a little bit of compressing when we put it on, which we're going to do now. So as you can see from the case, there's a little bit of a ridge here, but there's not a great deal for expansion for the cables. So what we're going to have to do is when we put it on, we're just going to compress those cables in a little bit as we slide it forwards. So once we've got that in, we just need to tighten up the thumb screws. Top and bottom. So that's now the side panel in place. Just double checking that it's all lined up correctly. That looks all good. no tabs sticking out anywhere, so all fine on that. Right, so now this is pretty much all together. We've got everything connected up. I'm not going to put the window on just yet. I like to see that it's all working properly before I start sealing it up. But now it's a case of now we load Windows onto it. So we've now got Windows installed. I've run a little benchmark test to see how well it performs. I've put the side panel back on now. So it's now looking like that. So now, happy with all that, it's time to do the peel and reveal. And that is one computer all built.